Over to you, Jess.
Good afternoon on the East Coast and good morning on the West Coast. Thank you for joining our Reimagine Talent webinar, Trump Policies and Global Changes, How Will They Affect Talent? My name is Jessica Oberto, Director of Process and Implementation here at People Science. If you're not familiar with People Science, what we do is provide talent acquisition advisory services, recruitment process partnering, recruitment placement services, and our software HireGate, which is our HR technology that augments the ATS and provides recruitment and AI data-driven insights. You can always learn more about us at www.people-science.com. So for these webinars, you'll find that they're more conversational between our panel. So if at any point you'd like to include something or ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will do our best to make sure that we get back to you. So now on to our special guest for today. First is our host, Christine Nicholas, founder and CEO of People Science and HireGate, a visionary in the talent acquisition industry and a widely respected thought leader in all aspects of recruiting. Christine founded People Science to help companies solve their toughest hiring challenges and transform how they acquire talent they need today and in the future. Since 1997, she's led the development of cutting-edge information systems, processes, and methodologies within TA, as well as the development of our proprietary software, HireGate. Next, we have Suzanne Turpin. Suzanne has over 20 years of TA and HR experience as a director of TA and strategic business partner alongside executive teams within banking at places like SunTrust and Truist and nonprofits such as the American Red Cross. She focuses on strategic initiatives related to recruitment and staffing and utilizes market and industry data to develop recruiting plans that will capture top talent. And we have Matt Charney with us today. Matt Charney is recognized as an expert at the intersection of talent and technology.
Can I just say Google me and we'll cut it off from there? Appreciate you.
Thanks.
Spoken as the true disruptor that he is and the reason he's on this call. Sorry,
It's
Jess.
just like very awkward for
so it
listening to,
But Matt has a great reputation for giving us insightful and impactful contributions to the field. He's a seasoned pro in TA and marketing and currently serves as the Chief Marketing Officer at Employer.com and Editor-in-Chief at Recruiter.com. Matt was also the TA practice leader at HR.com, where he managed recruiting programs, including research, events, and recruiter relations. He's also held advisory positions with multiple startups, providing mentorship and strategic guidance to early-stage businesses. So welcome, Matt and Suzanne. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And there's a method to my madness for asking both Suzanne and for Matt to be on. I was just saying to Matt before we went live, the biggest disruptor in my life, because I live in talent acquisition, happened in like early 2000s when I met Matt Charney, and he was like really shaking the game up with kind of simplistic things like this is just not right, or the candidate experience matters, way before anybody else is saying it, right? And so now when I look at the world that we live in and this kind of disruption, I'm like, where's Matt? Right. So I think it's a great time to have Matt in here as we really talk about talent and the effects of the new administration, the Trump administration's policies. Let me just put a big disclaimer out there. We are totally agnostic. We are centralists on this call, looking to talk about the effects of policies and policies that may or may not happen as it affects the world of talent and the talent ecosystem. So to balance ourselves out, I've also asked Suzanne Turpin, who I've known since 2013, Suzanne?
Yeah, long time.
Yeah, right. And Suzanne has worked with very large organizations, right, in the talent acquisition space. I was really happy to have you come on because of your background in more like legacy organizations, right, and the experience that you bring to the table. Yet you always manage to stay on the edge, and we all know how hard that is, right? As we're longer in these seats, not going to mention age. The longer with seats, the more we find that out. So I know, and to our main audience, thank you. I know it's 2025. This is our first webinar. We usually have one once a month. To be honest, last month it was kind of like deer in the headlights. Like, what do I talk about? Everything that we had on the slate, even the panelists we had intended for January, were like, nothing's relevant right now until we kind of get a grip on where we are. So we decided to push until there was a little bit more of a history to work with. So here we are today. But we will continue our series starting again next month. Next month, we'll be talking about the total ecosystem. So cool. Let's get on with the discussion. I'm also going to we'll just talk, Jess, if you could just flip up the current unemployment rate, which is right now at 4%. I know I typically start with a bunch of numbers from the BLS. they haven't changed a lot. Even since last year, we did see the unemployment rate go down to 4%. Essentially, probably the most important bullet, in my opinion, about this, you guys are welcome to chime in, is that most economists consider us at full employment between 4 and 6%. We've been way down into the, below that, actually into the threes. I know that doesn't help if you're not employed right now. So I know I'm going to get an onslaught of messages, because I usually do when I make that statement. What does 4% mean? I think this is something that we're all exploring, but right now it's the best number we have. The JOLTS reports and others are pretty much stayed the same. So that's where. Any comments about the unemployment rate before we jump right into the effects of policy?
Well, yeah. So I anticipate that in about 3 months, which is their adjustment pace, we're going to see pretty significant changes from the numbers reported. The other thing I point out is that job searches now are taking the longest that they have since 2018. So a lot of people who would otherwise probably be tabulated the employment numbers simply because of the length of their unemployment are not reflected, and therefore they're not considered like active workforce members.
Yeah, agreed, Matt, agreed. It'll be interesting to see how that's going to change the next coming months for sure.
So your thought is that we're going to see the unemployment rate increase significantly because of the amount of people that in fact are not working but not reporting because they're on a long severance or taking time to report.
Yeah, I think it'll remain flat because I think that you'll continue to see a percentage of people continue to drop out of actively looking for a job. And then you're also likely to start to see people rolling off of that because of the increasing predominance of contractors, solopreneurs, gig employees, and other non-traditional employee arrangements.
So, typically, if you look at like the Clover effect of your contractors, your temporary employees, your consultants, their business wanes before that we feel it in the employment sector. Is that what you're alluding to too?
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing I'll say is that while JOLTS only has non-farm payrolls, I would anticipate in about 3 months, the farm payroll is probably going to be about zero. So
interesting. Not that I'm writing this down, but we are recording it. So definitely going to come back and take a look. But I can see where you're coming up with the trends. I think something else that's really important, I know I talked about this probably in December, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics does track job growth, right? So they're over a 10-year period. So the last period accounted for was 2013 through to 2023. And what we saw was this significant increase in new jobs created, right? So it was at a rate of 13.7%, which is pretty significant, the highest in recorded history over a 10-year period. I think what's interesting is they've made proclamations going into 2030 now, right? So saying 2030 or 2033, saying that we'll only see an increase of 4%. And then when you read all the footnotes, the reasoning behind that is not just because of AI, but because of the lack of talent. So in other words, we can expect, in my opinion, an innovation stall because we just don't have the right amount of talent that we need to keep the growth of the organizations going. So in other words, a 4% growth won't be because of lack of want to open more jobs. It'll be lack of talent to sit in those seats. Thoughts on that one?
Well, I guess I have questions too. Do we think that that's going to be in certain fields? Right. As an example, do we think that that's going to have an uptick on those with college degrees because maybe they're not seeing the value in it? Just thoughts. Because I do think as I talk to some younger people, they're starting to think, is that worth it? Do we start to think about different types of roles that I don't need to have a degree in it? So is that going to have an impact on some of what we're looking for is experience, skills in particular roles? That'll be interesting to tell.
I think that the market for college grads is about to be extremely diluted because you have these massive government cuts, right? And one of the prerequisites for almost every one of those roles is a college degree, right? On the other hand, I do think you're going to see more of a premium in people without post-secondary education, only because of both the tariff situation and the immigration situation. You're going to start seeing probably the price, the hourly labor rate go up as well. Pretty dramatic increase in those types of positions as well. So I would say it probably just depends on experience level and industry to an extent.
Right. Yeah.
So when we think about it, I'm running a large organization, or a smaller, it doesn't matter. I'm in charge of talent acquisition. I'm in charge of talent for the future of my organization. To
Right.
me, this is just feeding the fuel of, we've got to get it up there. We have to really keep promoting talent and talent management and talent solutions.
Mhm.
Because when we look at how this is going to affect our GDP, and just, can you pull up the AI slide that shows the disbursement of AI talent between Germany, India, the United States, and Germany, India. Let's just take a quick look. So our research department was pulled this up, which kind of deer in the headlights for me. I don't know if
Mhm.
anybody else has seen this. Germany, Great Britain, India, and the USA. And this slide clearly shows you where the AI talent resides. So a little data, right? So this goes up to 2023, I believe. So as you take a look at how we're growing, and it doesn't show us growing much in our own internal talent in AI. Right? So this is a snapshot in time right now.
Mhm.
So
Just, do you know by chance like how they're defining like AI skills or for this
we
example?
do have, yeah, Jess, can you just flip to the positions? I'm not sure that these are the exact positions that were in scope, but they were, your typical titles: data engineer, data scientist, analyst, machine learning, applied science, research science, analytical engineer, data architect, business intelligence engineer, research engineers.
Mhm.
Now, as a consequence of this, there's been a lot of talk about what kind of talent is really going to be needed in AI. And I have to tell you, I've been listening to some of the CEOs of the larger AI contingencies, and they keep talking about the need for social workers. For I so wanted to be a philosophy major. I'm like, you're never going to make any money doing that. So yeah, talk about unemployment. But philosophy majors, the time has come. So they're talking about more of these soft skills, right? Even like from an editing perspective, and some of the other, what we might say, Bachelor of Arts people. So where are things going from here, and how we don't even know what the influx of AI is going to do to the type of talent that's needed. To me, and you tell me if I'm wrong, Matt, but this just mimics IT, right? Like, this is like, okay, this is what's going to happen in IT, when we know that it's a lot more than an IT world when it comes to AI.
Yeah, and I obviously think you're going to see the workforce cuts as a result of AI sooner, and then the rehires start to pick back up because people, it seems, are completely overestimating its impact. But what I expect to have happens the same thing that has happened we're in the fourth generation of the Industrial Revolution, like the fourth wave. And every single time there's been this sentiment that technology is going to replace jobs, particularly technology and automation. What we've seen is it actually increases jobs significantly. So there was a time when people thought like the internet was going to kill people's jobs. And thank goodness it didn't, because I wouldn't have had a career. But yeah, I expect we're going to see a pretty big across the board increase in probably 2 to 3 years once everyone's AI experiments fail or they run out of money for it. Just in terms of what that looks like in picking back up employment.
I think
Curiously,
we're starting to see that already.
I'm sorry, curiously, Christina, see the jobs, but do we know in specific is it healthcare, manufacturing? Do we know anything where we think that may trend? Because I know one of the things that I'm starting to see is some big trends in AI as we look at healthcare, right? These robotics, right? Now are we going to have robotics? They'll come in and you'll be able to do an x-ray while you're there and you don't have to go somewhere else. So that will impact other trickling down effects. So I'm just curious, do we have any information specific to jobs, families?
We do it people science, and just maybe part of the deck that we can send out.
Okay.
We can kind of give you a scope on that, but I'll tell you a couple of things that we've taken note to, and that is when you look at AI and where it's been the most effective, even prior to the onslaught of ChatGPT, it really, you have to have the intelligence. I don't think we can say that enough. Artificial intelligence requires intelligence, and that's why when we did, I don't know if you've seen the kind of reporting that we did about the effects of diversity and bias in AI, because it's just regurgitating what's on the internet, right? So you want to find out if you're biased, take some of the AI bias tests, because it'll really help you figure that out. But if you look at industries that have a lot of data, banking, the whole premise of fintech came, this is a faster, shorter way to learn if your credit score is good and how fast can we get your mortgage through, or how fast can we
Right.
get you a microloan, right? So that
Right.
these started 15 years ago. And
Mhm.
then if you look at insurance companies, there's some very interesting work that's being done around that. So, but I think, AI is in this push-pull kind of thing. There's some interesting things going on in Texas right now about healthcare, Texas and Colorado, where there's proclamations that have come out, and actually different types of laws that they're instituting to say
Mhm.
that you can't use AI to determine if you're a healthcare provider or a healthcare
Yeah.
insurance company to use that to decide what my care should be.
Mhm.
So it's interesting, but we're going to get to AI in a second. I want to just pause here a second and say, typically in this webinar, we talk about those four big buckets as they affect talent and talent in motion. And those
Right.
are diversity and equity, DEI. Is it still DEI? I don't know. Inclusion. Every day it's changing. Return to the office, AI, DEI, and generations in the workforce. So what our team here has done is we've taken, just can you pull up the slide that shows the Reuters report, which gives you an itemized list, and our viewers will be able to download the deck that's going to give you, I think this is one of the best snapshots I saw. These are the executive orders that have come out. Now, this is not the end all be all. Certainly, many of
Nope.
these are being argued. But I think it's a good snapshot if you're saying, how do I plan for what's happening and what should I keep myself aware of? Kudos for being on here. We certainly know that there's so much more than what we know at this point. But I think having these conversations and keeping these conversations going are important. So follow Suzanne, follow Matt, stick with us, and we'll all keep talking, and tell us what you think too. So what we decided to do is first look at return to work and some of the effects. So you'll see that we've broken these out. When we look at return to work, the executive order that stuck out the highest is requiring all federal employees to come back into the office rather than allowing them to work remotely. Now, that's certainly not an edict to the whole world or the country, but talking about the speed of the leader and the speed of the pack, I always find it interesting too that we talk a lot about bias in the workforce.
Mm.
HR talks about bias all the time. Do we understand? And we talk about leadership, right? Like,
Mhm.
your leader dictates your culture. You can put as many
Right.
initiatives as you want, but the leader, and so the leader of the free world, when they make a proclamation, has a tremendous effect. I think one of the questions I had is, are you seeing other leaders since this proclamation came out from President Trump? Are you seeing other leaders that are saying, yeah, we've always wanted, or yeah, it's time for us to go back into the office? Anybody seeing and hearing that?
I mean, you are seeing that. I mean, it predates probably Trump's inauguration, but not his candidacy. Obviously, Jamie Dimon has been out there drilling it up. Then you have a litany of companies from like Oracle to FedEx to Tenet Healthcare who are now starting to require it. So I think it's sort of across industries. I imagine that there's a correlation between trying to drive, attrition and at the same time not being able to get out of leases for office space.
Yeah.
Agree. Plus the economy, right? Because I know in DC, that's one of the big pieces here is to get people back into DC because that helps your economy, buying more lunches, staying for dinner. So I think there's an impact to that certainly has a part of the decision-making process.
Yeah, I mean certainly to an extent. And I just think though that interestingly, I'm sure we'll talk about this. Return to the office policies are diametrically opposed to DEIB policies. So it's interesting to see the switch over in sentiment towards RTO and away from DEI.
Yeah, great.
How so? Expand on that a little bit for us, Matt.
So two things. One is that the greatest influencer over class mobility and economic, and the largest driver of economic stratification is actually commute times. So the longer you have to commute, the less you're likely to make, the less likely you are to get promoted, and the fewer employment opportunities you have, simply put. And that's been shown in like a bunch of longitudinal studies. Secondarily, you've seen, and if you look at like the BLS data, you've seen almost parity in between women and men in the workforce. I think that a large part of that has been driven by being able to have like virtual or decentralized work, in the sense that obviously takes care of childcare and a lot of those like labor costs. And then finally, you see a stratification among races racially in terms of companies that are positions that require in-person work versus companies that allow virtual work. So I do think the harder RTO mandates are pushed, the greater the erosion of DEIB initiatives will continue to be.
It would be very interesting to see the correlation between those that are eliminating their DEI and their RTO policies and how they coincide. That's something we should probably look at that, right, Jeff?
Yeah.
That is something that we should look at. And it brings to mind another thing. We were talking about leadership and speed of leaders, speed of the pack. There's been a lot of momentum gained. And diversity is a place that I lived for a long time, maybe 15 years of my life up to the Supplier Diversity Development Council. Basically because I was told years ago, well, you're really great for the position of presidency of this organization, but we don't want a woman at the helm, which kind of got me thinking, instead of Sue, I'm going to find out how we can make these kind of changes. But some of these policies, for example, DEI in particular, but I'm going to try and stay away from that a little bit. But if we look at some of the proclamations that are coming out too, how does this, and disruption, is good. And a lot of times I think about working in the Silicon Valley, having been a part of some of the techs and really being part of that atmosphere and being an entrepreneur myself, right? So I love disruption. I think it's important. And I think that we're going to see, there's always a gift in the garbage and lots of gifts in the garbage when you come in and you disrupt things. But do you lose momentum? Right. So if we came in and we totally disrupt diversity, which is kind of what happened during, I'll call it the George Floyd era during COVID, right? So we saw diversity brought to the forefront. Now, if we strip that away and we say we need to balance it out, or whatever the case is, whatever the terminology is that we're using, do we lose the momentum that was gained, that was genuine, that was worthwhile when we come in and disrupt things upside down? So as a disruptor, Matt, and by the way, that's one of the things that makes me say, when big tech came out and the leaders of big tech came out and said, we're excited about these new policies and what's going to happen with the new administration, there was a part of me that thought, as an entrepreneur, you do want to see change. You're used to change. You know what change can do.
Right.
So what do you think some of those costs could be, though?
Honestly, I don't think I think that what we saw was a switch from ESG or really into DE&I, but serving essentially the same function. It as long as you have the CEO average employee pay disparity that you have, as well as the sliding equity, that is virtue signaling at its best. A couple of things. We spent something, I think in 2022, $20 billion on training for bias, only to find out scientifically that you can't actually eliminate bias, and it increases the more you're trained on it. So, but additionally, what I was going to say was, I don't think that there has been any causation between innovation and diversity as it is construed generally by HR, which is visible minorities, gender, et cetera, right? What you do see in network analysis that the most innovative companies tend to have the most diffuse networks, right? So using it as an example, if I go to Stanford, it really doesn't matter what race or gender I am. I'm going to be in a certain pay bracket. I'm going to think a certain way, and I'm going to have a certain network, right? So what we see is that the companies who have more distributed people background-wise, regardless, generally tend to be the most innovative. But ultimately, all of that work to drive DE and I think it just got to the point where obviously, if you were to pull up another BLS chart, consumer confidence is down, price index is up. Companies are wanting to cut as many costs as possible and drive as much value as possible. DE&I has had limited to no impact on revenue, share price, or returns. At least not that's been documented in the United States. Now, there are some other countries like India, caste system. There's some stuff there that has. But long story short, I think that as long as we do not continue the rollback of federal laws, so things like the Lilly Ledbetter Act, equal pay for equal work has been guaranteed since the Geneva Accords in 1953. So I think enforcement is actually going to be the most important consideration for companies moving forward. And I think that rather than stifling innovation, just knowing that, you've checked the boxes rather than trying to check all the boxes all the time and then be sensitive to every group and every pronoun and all that. I actually think that that will drive more innovation, the less that an emphasis put on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with and thinking about the dollar figures that are attached to DEI. But I also want to go back a little bit just to say about before these decisions are made, what conversations are happening at the table, at leaders to be able to talk about, be transparent around their decision-making process, to be able to share some of that information or just decisions being made, right? So that's my thing, is that I think it is so important to engagement, to be able to talk about that at a leadership level and what impact it's going to have and what you're going to continue to focus on.
And
Well,
if
and
I
I
could,
think,
one thing, I lost the plot there for a second, which is to say that going back to compliance,
Mhm.
two things have always been illegal under U.S. employment law.
Mhm.
One is quotas, and
Mhm.
one is using a protected characteristic as a factor in either making a hiring or promotional decision.
Mhm.
So literally almost all DEIB initiatives have actually been a violation of federal law. So I think going back to compliance, you're going to actually probably start to see more meaningful change as those pulled up and
so since DEI has not been successful, I'm just recapping what I'm hearing. And I'll tell you, it's a very slow, I always describe it like a very slow go. It's like when you're changing headsets, it's, like we said, and we find out that our own bias creates more bias. It's been a slow go. So this disruption could actually bring huge benefits, maybe. Who knows? We don't know yet.
No,
I
we don't.
think, but I think the important thing about attending and being part of these conversations, again, I, always welcome the audience to bring in some questions too. But these are the kind of things that the C-suite, the CEO in particular, need to know about. Our biggest measurement of world's population's trust, so where they go to that I can find is presented at Davos, is the Edelman Trust Barometer. It's come out again this year. I think it's like 62% of the world's population puts their great. So if you're not familiar, the Trust Barometer measures the world's population's trust in 4 sectors: non-government entities, government, media, and business. So since 2020, there's been a huge focus, and the trust has gone almost predominantly over to business, which is a very unique situation. During during the Obama administration, it was actually higher in government, which was an interesting twist. What we've seen is the decrease in government, the decrease in media. Media is probably scaling at the lowest. And maybe even had a little further dip last year, and then non-NGOs kind of following suit with the government. So this is still this opportunist time for businesses to do 2 things in that I think can really position us well. A, for you to say, who am I really as an organization? We live in this time of transparency where authenticity is everything. Ooh, Matt's finally of age, right? Disruption happens now, and you can come out as an entrepreneur. You couldn't come out as an entrepreneur without being judged before, right? So as all these pieces are coming together, I think that these questions come up that we as leaders in human resources can take and say, look to our C-suite. What are our real values? Who are we really? Case in point, Jess, can you just throw up the slides that show what happened to Target, what's going on with Costco, what's happening with your customer base, right? So I think we're all being challenged. Organizations are being challenged at this point to put some lines in the sand and to say, who are we as an organization, and who are our customers, and our customers in a B2C environment, and which is the majority of our world, right, are our candidates. So when we look at it that way, what is the message? Who are we? The second large bucket win on this, probably the largest and most influential win when it comes to creating talent, is, if we go back and we say there's not enough talent, it's the employers that position themselves, A, to know who they are, authentically know who they are, and start to get myopic about who their talent ecosystem is. Who is it? And do you have enough of it? And if you don't, how are you going to create it? And I can tell you that I think a lot of the organizations that we come into, now arguably, no one calls us since things are going really well, come in and tell us what to do. But in most cases, and tell me if you guys agree, talent acquisition is still very reactive. It's not funded as well as it needs to be. There is not enough reporting and data in talent acquisition to even tell you what's going on half the time. It's a lot of assumption, right?
Yeah.
And it's a lot of catch, can, and then it's I'm firing everybody because we're not going to hire this year anyway. When you look at other departments, that is not the case, right? So if we start to really look at talent and you take this into the organizations that are doing a good job at pinpointing this, which they're out there, and you coach yourselves and you coach your C-suite and you get this buy-in and you understand this. And this is not pie in the sky. We're seeing it work every day. To me, that's where Talent Act is going. That's where your internal talent is going. That's how you build a stealth organization. It's almost like you go back, actually going back a bit to where you're creating your own kind of hires. Thoughts on that big picture? Matt looks like you're going to jump off a bridge.
I'm sorry.
You look like you're going to jump off a bridge.
Yeah. I mean, I'm about there, right? So it's just when we like talk about trends at work, I'm just always want to caveat it by saying, and trends in talent acquisition in particular, I always kind of caveat by saying that it surprises me that TA is still an extant function. It shouldn't be, right? For myriad reasons. Is it proactive? Yes, because it's order taking in a cost center. And like all of the stuff we talked about earlier with economic, like, you know, headcount growth or headcount attrition, all that has been driven by lack of workforce planning, right? So until we have the data you were talking about, the analytics we're talking about, we're going to continue the cycle of feast and famine, which we saw, you know, tech is a perfect example, 2021, 22, way overhired. And now everyone's like, oh, the tech industry is in trouble. It's only because they hired 30 to 50,000 people that they didn't need and are realizing it now. So yes, it's a reactive function. It also is one that likely is, I think it's a dying industry at best. But I've also said that for at least 2 economic cycles now. So there you
Wait, you think the tech industry is a dying industry?
go. No, TA, and
Okay.
yeah, no, I don't think tech is a dying industry.
So what does TA morph into if it's dying?
I think TA morphs into hiring manager self-service, right? Once companies realize that 95% of their hires are being made by employee referrals and internal mobility, and you realize you don't need a $180,000 sourcer to basically do what they do on like Catfish, right? Like they're like, let's reverse image search. Oh, found this coder, right? Like nobody needs to do that, right? So I think what we're going to see is that administration, like talent intelligence, talent ops, shift under sort of a COO operation, right? And then I think that people will be responsible for working with HR directly as a hiring manager to kind of drive their own hiring headcount. Because again, there's so many platforms now where I can stack rank candidates against a job description, automatically reach out, automatically get like interview feedback and criteria, pop them on the schedule, and then figure out like approximately what salary they're going to want. So I think right now, the only job that TA is really fulfilling most of the time is essentially being able to project manage and delegate these various tasks, which could very easily be automated.
So I can add to that one, can I? Don't totally disagree. What I would say, however, is that I believe with the changes in AI is going to give the opportunity for talent acquisition and HR, right, under that umbrella, to be able to have more time to do things they need to be doing. And that certainly is, I believe, networking and doing things that continue to build up our pipeline, make our name bigger. The other piece I'd say to it is, and I know you all may not necessarily agree with me on this, I absolutely believe is an imperative for talent acquisition, for HR to be at the table with the business owners so they can be more proactive and less reactive. So they're hearing from the business conversations how they think things are trending, right? Are there going to be, are we going to build a new, we're going to extend an office? Are we going to lay people off? What are we going to do so that they can be more proactive on their plans to be able to pivot more quickly? And I think right now, that is imperative to be able adjutant to be adaptable, pivot, be flexible. All these things I think are just so important to it, because I find when you're not at the table, you're finding out late, and how much later are you finding out, so you can make your plan to be able to address it. So that's the
Well,
thing
and
I would add.
we can give you numbers to substantiate that. I hate to disagree with you, Matt, but I disagree on a lot of the points because having seen this in action, I can tell you when you line three things up, when you recruit the same way that you onboard and you onboard the same way that you manage. So you have your general EVP, your EVP as it disseminates into a division all the way down to a job, down to a hiring manager. When you line those three up, you see increased retention, you see increased productivity, and you see increased innovation within those divisions. This is something that we measure very closely because that's really what our SLAs are with our customers. So can it be done through a TA perspective? Yeah. Can it be done through the old school TA and what the bulk of our country looks at as TA? No, that's an epic fail, true. But really lining up with the business. The other cautionary tale I would say is talent acquisition in itself is a profession. When we take that and we say to a hiring manager, you be the guy, well, you're also the guy running sales operations. You're also the guy running how to make widgets, doing development. I don't know that that's what I would say the end game should look like. I really believe that when you line these three up. The other thing I would throw out there as far as what you do to recruit, it's a big ecosystem. Right. And right now, the challenge is that the bulk of the technology in talent acquisition starts with the applicant because it's with the applicant tracking system. Oh my gosh. If I say this one, when I die, it's going to be on my tombstone. It's not the ATS's fault because there's a lot more to recruiting than the applicant. And those technologies were created to start when the applicant applies. And there's so much more. So when you measure all these other pieces, when you have the technologies to do that, which by the way, we have, but there's lots of technology out there that can actually support this if you can get it together the right way. You can then look at what do the source candidates have to say? So what are the candidates that fit the bill that don't work for me or don't know me or aren't approaching me? What are my applicants? What am I incoming? How's that going? What are my internal referrals? And who should I be training up? So when you look at, and then also, by the way, adding in your consultants and your contingent workforce, when you can look at those five together, now you're looking at your whole ecosystem. When you look at your whole ecosystem, you can make a better decision on how you're going to get there. And when talent is that scarce, getting myopic is the solution.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. A couple things. One, to Suzanne's point, I think that if TA wants a seat at the table, it's probably imperative to extricate from the HR function sooner rather than later, right? HR kind of sucks at getting a seat at the table. And as far as I guess the contingent workforce management component goes, I think that is, you hit the nail on the head. That's going to be an increasing focus of internal teams is that kind of talent intelligence and workforce optimization, which means that you're going to start seeing a lot more dotted lines through procurement than likely before.
That's interesting. Dotted lines through procurement.
Well, I mean, that's who generally runs external vendors and consultants. So it's based on price, not on, culture or EVP.
I'm trying to make sure that we're staying on target because Jeff's probably sweating over there, right? I'm getting pinged by everybody.
We're moving, Jessica.
I'm getting messages in. They're enjoying the webinar so far. So keep going.
Good. So we talked about AI. Have we really talked about the influence of AI? I went back to our development team when I was reading the executive order that talks, or actually it's not an executive order, but the administration's approach emphasizes deregulation, substantial investments in AI infrastructure, and a focus on domestic production. So, in talking to our developers and our AI people, I had them come back to me and said, what does this infrastructure look like? It's almost like a grid. And I'm going to tell you, I'm pretty damn excited about it because China's trying to do it, right? China's trying to
They are succeeding.
And well, kind of, sort of.
The minute TikTok goes down, you notice how a open source AI search engine comes out. I think they're pretty well algorithmically.
They're ahead of the game. But again, when you work with a country that's not transparent, right? Like any of us who spent some time in China, everything's being watched, everything's being monitored. So we're not always sure what's coming out, but we can see the proof in the pudding from organizations like TikTok, where we can see that the algorithms are astounding. AI is just kind of coming off the charts. But I think it's a good idea to build this infrastructure now, to take a look at that now, because I don't think even, traditional ways of measuring things could very well change based on AI to begin with, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's a two-part thing. So we're at this, this pinnacle time, this pinnacle history in work, where we're starting to look at things different, and the big disruption that we had from COVID, and looking at all these pieces, and at the same time now introducing technology at the same time that can start to collect that data and boil the data up and bring it to the forefront. This is just an amazing. I can't retire because it's too damn interesting right now. I say that all the time.
That's for sure.
I'm trying to go lay on a beach somewhere for a couple of years, not happening yet. Yeah, but pretty cool. So any thoughts about that infrastructure? And if you don't, to everybody on here, if you haven't looked into this plan, I would definitely look at it, talk to the people in your IT departments within your organizations. Where do you fit in that scope? If you're, this is, for example, how is it going to shake up cybersecurity? Where are we going to get more of the bandwidth that we need? There's a lot of pieces. It's almost like looking at the grid. Right. It's almost looking at the power grids, which are certainly
That's
part
exactly
of
what it is. Like, the major driver of infrastructure for AI is electricity and the ability to have access to power, right?
Yeah.
Which you're going to start seeing, I think, from the AI space, because of that fact, an interesting shift in the geography of the technology industry. You're already seeing Apple moving to Barton Springs, Texas, which, by the way, like, what? But they announced yesterday they're building a factory of 1,000 people, like, that they're going to employ 1,000 people to just train their AI. Why? Because water's cheap, and like it's
Pace.
readily available, and obviously that's what drives power, plus deregulated electricity. So I think that's going to actually have the infrastructure part is going to play a pretty big role, because I can't think of a worse place to suck up power than Silicon Valley.
You should move to Loudoun County. We have a lot of it too.
Oh yeah.
Data centers on every single corner here now.
Yeah, except for the lack of the deregulation that's being pursued in the U.S., likely not being pursued by the Canadian government. I believe you have a right to privacy enshrined in the Canadian Constitution. We do not, sadly.
I would like to hear from anybody who's on the call that's familiar with working with power companies, because I wonder what that interface is going to look like. And having worked with them and been part of a regulatory board for diversity with them, power companies are pretty established organizations. They've been around for a really long time. And how can we capitalize on what they learned as far as keeping grids up, keeping things going, and how invested will they be in AI and how that's working? I know cybersecurity is a huge issue there, right? Because if you're going to have some kind of attack, where does it come from?
And the infrastructure.
These are all.
I think the plan's been laid out by blockchain and crypto, so they're just going to have to follow that playbook more than the general utility playbook.
Yeah, because everybody's so open to following the playbook of Bitcoin. I mean,
well, I mean, it takes actually more processing capacity and power than even running a LLM. So I do think that there are some examples there. Unfortunately, if I had my crystal ball, when I hear deregulation towards an industry that's so reliant on something as fundamental as power, I would not be surprised to start seeing the Enron-like business models of the world start creeping out, where energy becomes a tradable commodity. Seems to be where we're headed there.
And it is already by some very regulated operating companies. So that's interesting. And there's still Bitcoin miners out there. I have a miner here actually. Somebody gave it to me. Thought that was a good idea that they mine energy. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. Like, are you going to have high school kids sitting in their room using Bitcoin, using miners to collect power so they can power?
They already are. I mean, that's been going on for 15 years.
Yeah. So is it goodbye to the old grid and hello to your neighborhood teenage kids collecting energy through the air? It's just, it's astounding the different things that can happen. I think the point that I would go back to, though, is as an organization, when it comes to how you're creating talent, looking at the talent that you have and always thinking in terms of how do I create more? If you've got an AI development team, are you pairing them with those that might want to get into AI development? And are you creating employment relationships, albeit contracts or agreements, much like you see in the medicine field, where we're going to train you in AI and we're going to expect a 3-year commitment? I mean, are we really looking at things that way? Because if we went back to that slide that Jess was originally showing us, our little tiny black funnel there of the kind of talent that we have as compared to India in particular, where that's going. So I know we have great conversation, but I am trying to bring it back to the practicality of this, because you can take all these moving pieces and capitalize on them. We're still a capitalist society where opportunity is out there. You can still be fair and you can still build your group by doing this. But I think when we throw our hands up in the air or we keep doing the same old, you're going to get, you're going to drown at this point.
Yep, absolutely.
You've got to get clever. You have to be clever in how you do things.
And
cool.
I guess just from a reassuring standpoint, obviously TAHR love terms big data, the DI, these are all interchangeable with AI. We've been using tools that we call AI in our industry, which I don't want to get too technically, they aren't. Things like, stack ranking resumes or matching candidates against job descriptions for 2 decades now, right? Boolean hasn't even been supported. Don't tell your sources on Google since 2015. It's all been semantic based. So I think actually most of these the most helpful technologies are largely already embedded in products. And what you're actually just seeing is an investment in optimizing those at the same time, being able to charge a premium for having AI capabilities that were already there.
And being smart enough to know where they are. I mean, right now, so when I look at HireGate, we've got AI technology incorporated in there when we did a rebuild in 2020. So what's been interesting to me is it's the customer that's saying, I need this. I mean, we think we know everything. Yeah, no, we don't know anything. Because as soon as I say that, somebody
changes so fast.
Yeah. And they'll say, but I need this. And because of AI, we're able to materialize it very quickly, but it isn't something we thought of. So my point is we need the time too to say, wait a minute, can my AI tool do that faster anyway? And when I look at my roadmap, albeit a business model or albeit IT, when I look at that roadmap, what can be escalated faster and how long does that take? So just trying to shake out the mechanics. Like to your point, you can have this, but you need the information. You've got to have a lot of information, and you've also had to have the ingenuity. Again, that's where your innovation comes.
Yeah,
I don't want to.
I can't wait until TA has enough time on their hands to continue not calling candidates back. I'm very, very excited for that day.
I'm sure the candidates are too. But then when you send your resume to 300, because AI is so far ahead for the candidates compared to the clients or to the organizations, right? How are you going to respond to 300 resumes? How many people are going to get back to you that you can now send out with the flip of, one little switch? I want to keep moving though. We want to get to DEI. We also want to talk about generations in the workforce at this point too. So some of the executive orders that you'll see on the Reuters list that we were talking about are ending birthright citizenship, ending federal efforts to hire women or racial minorities, closing all federal government DEI offices and firing all federal employees working in DEI initiatives. I did not exaggerate those. I shortcutted them. I know there's a lot of people that this is a very, very sensitive issue for. While I appreciate that we are where we are, we're in the water where we are now. These things have not come completely to fruition unless there's autonomy from the White House to do that, such as closing the federal DEI offices. But again, many of these are being contested in the courts. But, there were some really interesting questions that came up with this panel, right? And things that I've been asked too about this. So, for example, if birthright citizenship is going to change, and Harry's working over here, and he's a birthright citizen, is ICE going to come in and say, deport him? I mean, how does that change the interview process? How does that change who we're targeting? And what should we do that? So I'm throwing that out to the audience. I'm throwing that out to the panel. Thoughts around where do we go with it?
One of my favorite Trump quotes was that he is not going to deport Harry because with his wife, he already has enough problems on his hands, right? So we can knock that out. But, I think other than that, the way that work is going in that chart, I think with India, predominating, Germany and UK's share will continue to shrink in that. Their economies are both tanking. But what you're seeing is a globalization of work. And so I don't know, particularly as you start seeing company like deals valued at hundreds of billions of dollars for a reason, right? And that is because this idea of distributed teams and like companies' workforces not being geographically bounded is not only real, but it is probably the driving trend in the world of work right now, right?
Mhm.
So if somebody's not a birthright citizen, does it mean they cannot work for an American company? Certainly not. So I don't see that for having a hugely profound change on skilled labor.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Okay, but here's where the conflict comes in.
Tell us.
We are operating in a world that's globally based
Yes.
from a world perspective, but our country is becoming more and more of a nationalist. The current administration is officially moving us more towards a more isolated state. I mean, in every way, shape, and form. So how do we expect that there won't be tariffs on labor, that there won't be significant changes from the current administration that'll start to even changing immigration laws?
Yeah.
Right. And
No.
I don't know what's going on with visas right now because I'm taking a deep dive into it. But as we become more of a nationalist, at least for the term of this particular presidency, we become more of a nationalist society. What does that mean to this global workforce and organizations that are predominantly global?
I mean, you're seeing a model that most European countries have followed for quite some time. I mean, you have the Eurozone, obviously, but then you have, very restrictive immigration laws. And now we're actually starting to do what most of them, Sweden, Ireland, et cetera, have had in place for years, which is, guess what? Anyone can get a visa. You just have to have $5 million to do it. Right.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
So all that is to say, that model has actually been widely adopted. Like the nationalist protectionist model
Mhm.
has not only already been sort of entrenched, particularly in Western and Central Europe, but it is one that in many ways, I think actually is America, like our policy is lagging in a lot of that, which is why you are seeing us being a net importer instead of exporter for the first time in U.S. history.
And you wonder if, thinking out loud, if what we know as other countries, an example is India, and they have more technology, right? That skill set is something that have more of it that we don't. Is that going to impact us? For now, we'll have less of those people. We have less people with that skill set to be able to hire. Will it? If we don't.
Yeah, so I'm not. I can't probably respond to that in a way that's not going to strike people as derogatory, but there's a level of business acumen that is incredibly different between markets beyond like functional abilities and expertise.
Mhm.
And so I think that actually any sort of protectionist measures will probably inflate salaries of skilled American workers, even at the risk of net jobs.
Losing them, right? More retention dollars. Okay, I got you.
This is a big agenda.
It's a lot. Yeah, it is.
It's a big agenda. It's an interesting time. It's worth noting too that if we talk about again the influence that you can have with your C-suite on this from an HR perspective, right? So if we look at what happened at the boycotts that are on the rise that happened at Target, right? So Target lost $15.7 billion when they announced rollbacks in diversity.
Right.
Here again, to me, that is such an obvious snafu. Like, if I understand my target customer, actually, look at it, that was a spin on words, target customers, but I was meant actually like bullseye target customer. Okay, there you go again. Target customer. The target customer is that opposed. How did I not know that? And why would I make it an announcement? Right? If I'm going to delete it, do I have to tell everybody? If I'm going to knock that budget down, do I have to make that proclamation to everybody? I mean, it's
that's what I was talking about.
Okay.
That's what I was saying a little earlier. It's like you make these decisions, and certainly a piece of this are, driven by the leadership, but also driven by dollar savings. You're not having to support that. But then what is that meeting going to be? Are you communicating? Is what I was speaking about earlier. Do people know why you're making, and what are you going to do about it instead of just, okay.
Yeah,
so I think there's
Never
just
an
not
explanation.
Yes.
talk with me, walk with me. We're
Yes.
eliminating this because it hasn't been effective, and we're replacing it with this.
Right.
Well,
Right.
To be cynical, though, let's take Amazon. They have rolled back their DE&I stuff, and I don't think they're hurting for year-over-year revenue returns. I think that Target is an example, and a lot of the more publicly facing companies who are seeing blowback on diversity policies, it's a convenient excuse for their CEO to justify loss of retail revenue. That's a trend.
Interesting.
Okay, but can you really deny? I think it's really obvious from Tractor Supply, right? You familiar with Tractor Supply? What they did? They lost $2 billion because they had DEI programs. They said so. They
Mm.
backed out of their DEI programs, and they've been winning business back ever since.
Mhm.
So I really do think that that's an interesting.
Undeniable.
Well,
And the thing about
Well,
Tractor Supplies, they're kind of like, we understand our customer. And that's why we're going to do this. We're listening to our customer. Now, I will tell you the coattails of that. There's been some rise in people that are, against multiple genders and against the LGBT community that, really take a firm stance on that are kind of supporting the Tractor Supply. But, is it going in this direction? If we come back and we say we need to look at our corporations, if you're the CHRO at a corporation, or you're in the C-suite at the corporation, or you're in charge of talent for your organization, you need to know who you are. And maybe Tractor Supply, the people that they recruit fit the MO of their customer too, and that's where it should be, because typically it does. So is it about, I forget the effects that it has on the entire country, and let's just say, do I know who I am as an organization? And how do I put that face forward? And if we go back to the Edelman Trust Barometer, there's no time like now to do it, because the trust is really going into the leadership of business. There's never been a more important time or mark in history for businesses to step up to the plate, identify who you really are and what you're really about.
Yeah.
Because it's not just it's going to help you, but it's going to have an incredible effect on our economy and hence the global economy. Done with my soapbox on that. Jess, I know we have 4 minutes left. I just want you to pop up that slide, because I did. This is not meant to be political. We do want to talk about generations in the workforce. I'm just going to give you a snapshot really quick. This one, we'll get to this in 1 second, Jess. But my point is, when you look at Congress, which was so interesting to me, when we look at Congress, it's actually divided by generation at the same rate that we are as far as the country is concerned. So just, can you just go back to Steph's slide? Yeah. If you look at, this is the House in purple, Republicans in the silent generation, 14 to 13, boomers, 89 to 81, Gen X, 94 to 86. Look at how it's split down the middle. And on the Senate side too, 3 to 3, 31 to 29. To me, what this is saying is in the talent space, are we really going to see changes when we're seeing the comeuppance of our Congress still at that divide, even in the age brackets? And I think there's a misnomer out there that that Beta Gen and Gen Z are a different breed. And this is not trending in that direction. Okay, Jess, take us to your last slide so you take a look real quick.
Sure. So we had our research team go and take a look on the topics that we spoke about today and kind of get an overall consensus of how the specific generations are feeling about some of these policy changes and updates. So for return to work, you can see baby boomers and Gen X. They kind of like that in-office structure, like the face-to-face collaboration piece, but there are some baby boomers that are a little bit concerned about flexibility, getting ready to retire, those types of things. Millennials and Gen Z tend to prioritize flexibility and autonomy. So looking to remote work, but you also have a small portion of them that are focused on, well, how do I get professional development if I'm working remotely? Looking at AI, you can see the older generations are prioritizing economic and security aspects, but they do have some reservations about rapid changes in technology and growth. And then the younger generations, they've grown up with technology, right? So they've been exposed to it, they embrace it, but they are concerned about ethics, privacy, and equitable implementation for some of these programs. Looking at DEI, our older cohorts, the baby movers, and some Gen X may support the rollback, favoring traditional merit-based hiring systems. Then you have the younger generations, the millennials, Gen Z, who generally oppose these types of changes. They see them as harmful to progress and workplace inclusivity. looking over to the immigration policy changes that we're looking at, the baby boomers and some of the Gen X may tend to support stricter immigration controls. They prioritize security and economic concerns. And then with our younger generations, the millennials and Gen Zs, generally they are opposed to these types of changes, viewing them as harmful to social cohesion and humanitarian values. So we kind of took all of our research and surveys that we cited and rolled it into this chart. We will send this out to everyone after the webinar. Thoughts, feedback?
So I think it's great that DEI is on there, since like essentially you're showing age discrimination anytime you reference this. But I mean, generational theory is like all of these make sense if you think about it. Yeah, when you're younger and have less responsibilities, way easier to be concerned about ethics when you don't have to pay a mortgage, right? So I think this is more of a reflection of where they're at in life than any sort of barometer in terms of like societal change. Eventually, we all just come around to disliking people and like yelling at our neighbors from the porch, right?
My grandmother told me never marry a man until he becomes a Republican.
Okay. I had to think about that one.
I didn't even know what that meant. I was like, I didn't even know what it meant, but I remembered it for my whole life. And then like I started to realize it as I got older. No, you know, you're right to the point that this could actually be discrimination in itself. But I think it's important to acknowledge what's going on with people entering the workforce. We are so far out of time, like we don't usually run over. So I appreciate the audience hanging in there with us, and they have hung in here with us. I know there's some questions that we didn't get to. We'll make sure we'll go round robin on those in our follow-up, and Jess, I'll circulate them out to you so that you can get them out to the team. The deck will be coming out as well. Last words going around real quick. Anything to add at the end here? Jess, you go first.
There's just so much going on, so many things changing quickly. I think it's important to find your verified sources that you can trust, stay informed, communicate with your colleagues and within your networks, just to stay informed with all the changes that are going on.
And I think that politics is essentially just a distraction that we've created to take our attention away from free market capitalism. So, with no like, don't freak out
You
over
said that in the beginning.
Ultimately, capitalists will win, and they will continue to try to make as much money as possible, regardless if it's a Democrat, Republican, Trump, Biden, whoever.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say for me, it's, being able, as I spoke about earlier, being able to pivot, be flexible, make sure you're communicating with your team. Think about how it's going to be engaged, how you're going to engage all your staff, because there's just so many things that are going on in this world, whether that means for them within the business or outside, because they're looking at one of their family members who's going to be laid off through some of these things. There's just so many emotions that are going on. I think it's going to be tough. And I would say, if you haven't already, go to SHRM. They have a really great article right now on civility. I like this one on civility. It is good, because one of the things they're showing is that hugely down, I think 44% on civility, which just means social values in the workplace. And I think given our atmosphere, we are starting to see that. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, send us that link. We'll incorporate it in there. For me, you're going to hear what you always hear. It's time to really man up. We've got to be brave. We've got to be smart. Your organization can get there. I like Matt's point that, like, can you kind of put blinders on to what's going on around? You can't, because you have to pay attention to see how it affects you, but truth out, you can affect a huge change. We just need to get much more sophisticated and better at the way we look at our talent, how we cultivate it, and where it's going to come from year over year. Those solutions are out there. It's not as complicated as you think. You just have to come out of the box. So if you're entrenched and you're in the weeds, you got to find the time to come out of there. If you don't have a concept or an idea where to go, there's lots of people on this call. Even there's us. Reach out. Let's keep talking, because we will make a difference. It's a great time to be in our industry. And, I really think it's up to us to keep our own GDP going. So thank you, everybody, for being on. Love talking to you guys. Matt, thanks. Suzanne, thanks so much. Just talk to you in a minute. And thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks.